Okay, here we go.
Okay, November's rural parenting topic of the month is discipline strategies that actually work with kids. We have Dr. Abby Callis, Director of Quality Outcomes and Training here at Family Service and Guidance Center, with us tonight to answer your questions. So Dr. Callis, if you can give us a little brief background about yourself, and then we can jump right in with those questions.
Sounds excellent. Thanks, Megan. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly because I have a few slides that I think are helpful for us to reference as we go forward tonight. Except for I was at the last slide. And also I'll keep an eye on the chat if people have follow-up questions as I'm talking, and I will address all of the questions that you pre-sent when you registered. And then also, yeah, I think I'll get to all of those, but feel free to drop anything into the chat if you want me to go into any more detail about anything in particular. Also, as you can tell, I'm obviously at home. I have 2 dogs, and if they decide to say hi, I'll try to get them to be quiet quickly, but I always like to give a little warning that we might get a little interrupted by dogs because you just never know. But like Megan said, my name is Dr. Abby Callis. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work at Family Service and Guidance Center. I've been there about 15 years or so. And I do a lot of different work with a lot of different types and ages of children. So I've pre-looked at your questions, and I'm going to try to hit all of the things that you have interest in as we go forward tonight. First and foremost, I always like to point out that oftentimes when people hear the word discipline, the first thing they think is punishment. So you hear discipline, you think punishment, but it's really, really more complex than that. Just the basic concept of like, if I punish a behavior, I can stop a behavior. It's not so easy as that, as you know, or we wouldn't be here talking about those sorts, all of these sorts of things, because it's not quite that easy. But I do have a couple of points to remember just as we go forward, talking for the next hour or so, or hour or less, not more than an hour. I won't keep you long, but some points to just sort of remember as I get into your actual specific questions. One of them is people often talk about which is better, punishment, discipline, reinforcement, all sorts of words that you use to describe what type of behavioral management you're doing. And one of the things that I can tell you with pretty decent certainty is that in all the research that we have done about changing behavior, so just modifying behavior, whether it be good behavior, bad behavior, just changing it, positive reinforcement is usually a more successful tool to change a behavior than a punishment is. And I will talk more about what I mean by positive reinforcement. It doesn't mean that you're paying somebody to do something, like you provide your child ice cream when they clean up after themselves. That is not all that positive reinforcement is. There's a lot more to it than that. The other is for really, really young kids, you don't forget how powerful it can be just to remove them from whatever situation or behavior you don't like. That can be a really powerful tool to telling a really, really young child that you don't like what they're doing because you've picked them up and you've moved them. The other thing is oftentimes as adults, we want to hash out and talk about the things that are bothering us while they're happening. It's a sort of normal adult type of behavior. But for young kids, or not even young kids, just kids in general, all age ranges, this actually probably applies to adults too. But if you want to discuss an unwanted behavior or talk about changing an unwanted behavior, it will not work in your favor if you try to do it in the moment that the child is misbehaving. They will not be able to hear you in the way you'll be trying to talk to them. So waiting for that to have calmed and passed a bit will get you your best bang for your buck. And like I said, I am going to go into a lot more detail about all these things. I just wanted you to have some like points that you could take with you. When possible, it's incredibly important to make some sort of logical connection between a behavior and its consequences. So as an example, if I messed up at work and as a result, my boss told me I had to go home, he's probably not going to have the impact he wants to have, which is to make me not mess up. I might actually start messing up more so I can go home and I don't have to be at work anymore. So logical connections between behaviors and consequences make them stronger relationships. So they'll be more likely to work in your favor. And I will talk a lot more about that one in just a second. Another one is people often talk about timeout, and they use timeout as a consequence or a punishment for a behavior. And I always like to think about timeout as actually a different type of tool. You can use timeout as a punishment, meaning the standard amount of time is like 1 minute per year of age. So you can put your child in timeout for the misbehavior. But I like to also think of timeout as really a time period where you calm down. So from an adult perspective, I think about it if your boss is mad at you and they're yelling at you, you could yell back, which will get you in a lot of trouble, or you could go to your office, you could calm down, and then you could revisit the situation. So we take timeouts as adults all the time, sort of naturally. Kids don't do that yet because it is a more adult sort of advanced behavior. We have to teach them to use it in that manner. And we'll come back to that one as well. Next, one thing that I think we often forget when it comes to the behavior that kids engage in, particularly when it's behavior we don't like or it's bad, is that every behavior that a human engages in has meaning. In many cases, the behavior, whether you do it on purpose or not, is designed to serve a purpose or get one of your needs met. You behave in particular ways so that the people around you react in particular ways. Kids are really masters at this. And again, it is not always a choice. It's really important to remember that for kids with their behavior, sometimes it is a choice. They're doing things intentionally, and other times it's simply a reaction that we can work on shaping a different type of reaction to the situations that they find themselves engaged in. But it's most important to think about the fact that every behavior they do has meaning. None of it is random. There's always going to be some sort of meaning there, which means we can work on changing it. I already talked about length of timeout, 1 minute per year of age. And the last one that I want to mention here is because parents, or we as parents, often really forget this one, is that ignoring for young people, and by young people I mean all ages of children, it again works on adults too, but ignoring is an incredibly powerful tool that most of us stop using when we are working with kids. Ignoring is one of the most clear signs that what someone is doing is not going to earn them further attention. So hold on to that. We'll talk about ignoring more here in just a minute, but that is a super valuable tool that you have that you probably don't even think about always using. And then it's, I think kind of a no-brainer, but the more consistent we are with things, the more likely they are to be successful for us, just like anything else. If I want to learn a new language, the more often I'm consistent with my practicing, the better I will get at it. The same is true for these techniques. The more consistent you are with practicing them and doing them with your children, the more likely it will work to change their behavior. The last thing I want to say before I start talking about your specific questions is related to the types of reinforcers that exist. So a lot of times when people are trying to reinforce their child's behavior, they think about reinforcers as being something they've purchased or something they give them. And that is only one of 3 types of reinforcements. And the kind that you traditionally think of is called a tangible reinforcer. That is a physical reward. That is your paycheck when you go to work. That is the hug. Well, okay, that's probably a bad example. That is when someone buys you something for doing a good job. You turn in a stolen product and somebody gives you a gift card. Tangible reinforcers are literally the presentation or giving of a physical reward, not the most powerful reward that children respond to, even though it's the one we use the most frequently. The one that children respond to best that we are in control of is actually a social reinforcer. That is expressing the approval of a behavior. And see, that doesn't fall in the punishment realm, that falls on the consequence or the positive side. Natural reinforcers, though, are also something that we have access to that I'm about to spend a whole lot of time talking about in response to your questions. Natural reinforcers are the things that happen as a result of the behavior that we have chosen. And oftentimes when we're working with kids, we think about the fact that we have to apply a consequence to change their behavior, to make it better, or to make it worse, or to make it different. And the reality is Reinforcers happen without our control. Example, you could speed going wherever you wanted to go in the community every single day, and every so often, there will be a natural consequence to that action. It is the thing that potentially happens as a result of the behavior that you choose. Whether or not the potential thing that happens changes your behavior is what we're going to talk about teaching you how to do with your child, because you want the potential consequence to actually change their behavior. So as I've been talking, one of the things that probably stood out to you is that I keep using the word consequence. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now because that is all the slides that I have, and I want to have a bigger screen as I'm talking to you. But I've kept continuously using the word consequence because I want you to think about consequence probably a little bit differently than you do right now. And consequence literally means the thing that happens next. And life creates lots of consequences all of the time that we have no control over. They're just what happens next based on the behavior that we have chosen. If we're talking about this in the realm of behavioral management or discipline or changing our child's behavior, we set the consequences, they choose the behavior. Let me say that again. So if your child behaves in a way that you do not like, you set the consequence. You tell them what happens when they behave in a certain way, like A. You also tell them what happens if they behave in a certain way, say B, A or B. They get to choose it, but you tell them what the potential consequences are to both of those styles of behavior. Now they choose. And as parents, if we do a really good job of making sure that one of the consequences is desired and one of them is one they don't want, over time, they will start choosing the behavior that has the desired consequence. Now, it sounds simple from a concept perspective. You're like, oh, yeah, of course. That's actually quite a bit harder to do than it sounds. So I'm going to talk a lot about that in going through your questions now. So what I've done has grouped your questions sort of all together so that I could talk about them as a whole. And then I'll try to, if we have time, I'll try to go into a little more specifics for those of you who are here, if you want me to go any further into a particular area. But one of the first sets of questions that I was able to pick apart was this idea of sort of general behavioral principles that I think you can apply to all ages of children, with a little bit of a tweak to make it for really littles, because a lot of you ask questions about very small children. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So like as an example, you talked about how do I get my child to listen the first time, not the fourth time? Or how do I get him to do basic things without delay, without protest? The short answer to that is if they're already engaged in that behavior, I wish I had the magic wand to make it just stop. I don't. But what I can talk to you about is ways that will lead it in the direction you want it to go. It unfortunately won't be magic. It won't happen instantly, but if you're able to really make this shift, for pretty much every child I've ever worked with, eventually the shift will come. It just takes a little bit of time, and it's not, I know, always comfortable. But that being said, when you want a younger child, and sometimes older kids, depending on level of behavior, to do a basic thing you ask them to do without a whole ton of pushback, this is kind of got a two-part answer. The first is that in an effort to train a young child to do something you want them to do, you pair the behavior you want with something the kid wants. So I'll make up an example, like a really, really simple one. If you want them to clean their room, and right now they never do it without arguing, or if you want them to take their plate to the dishwasher and you can't get them to do that without like a massive tantrum, make it fun. First thing you can do is do things like it's a dance party while we clean. It's a beat the clock to the dishwasher. It's anything you can think of to make what you want them to do, what they also want to do. Now, I know on the inside, part of you are thinking, but I'm rewarding the negative behavior. It might feel that way in the beginning, but what I would want you to think about this as is almost a retraining period, because right now they know they do not have to take the plate to the dishwasher. They don't have to. they tantrum, and eventually you take the plate. In whatever way that plays out in your family, it could look different for all of you. But what they know right now is they don't actually have to take the plate to the dishwasher. Or if they eventually take the plate, it's after a very intricate argument period where there's lots of stuff happening. So making it fun for a minute might feel uncomfortable for you because you feel like you're rewarding. But remember, we're going to kind of throw out the words reward and punishment for a minute and think just consequence. The consequence for a dance party in your bedroom is the consequence for you is you get a clean bedroom. The consequence for beating the clock to the dishwasher is you get dishes in the dishwasher. The kid got to have fun with their parent without arguing. Everybody wins in this scenario, even though to some degree you may feel a little uncomfortable in the early stages. So that's the first thing. The second thing is for kids who are a little more entrenched in the behavior that you don't want. So maybe they're a little bit older, or maybe you've been dealing with tantrums for a very long time. You may have to also add what I said in the very, very beginning is a positive reinforcement or a positive consequence. So not only do you make an effort to make it fun, which is a training style, but maybe you attach a preferred thing to this task that you want done. The most important way to handle pairing what you want done to a positive consequence is that you do the pairing and that you have done it before you implement it. I remember one person asked a question about how do I do this without like losing my temper or yelling at them or not threatening things that I know I'm not going to do. Like it's Christmas. So how do I do this without saying I'm taking all your Christmas presents back because you know you're not going to do that? Is you pre-plan. It's effortful on your part. And I always tell people when I'm talking to them about this, I know it's a lot of effort on the front end, but you're already not having a good time of parenting at this moment. If we put some effort in on the front end, it will get better over time rather than being stuck in this uncomfortable place where you're not happy with the way things are going. But if you pair it, and you have done it ahead of time, you're always in charge. So here's some examples of what I mean by that. So let's say that you want your child to do something really, really basic, like pick up their trash or get dressed on time. And you've done this fun thing. You've tried that and it wasn't terribly successful because they were too far entrenched in their sort of negative behavior already. Then what you do is you find the thing they want and you attach that to the behavior you want. Example, let's say that your child plays with nothing but Legos. That is their favorite item. That is what they want to play with all the time. So for you, all the Legos become yours. They are in your possession. And if you have to do this in the middle of the night while your child is asleep, all the Legos become yours in the middle of the night while your child is asleep. But when they get up and put on their clothes in the morning and make it out of the door on time, the second they get home from school, you hand them the Legos. You do not hand them the Legos unless they got out the door on time. Hopefully that makes sense as an example. Feel free to like thumbs up or put a question in the chat if you need more detail about that. But the primary concept about what I'm saying here is you take the behavior you want and you attach what they want to it. And the only way they get what they want is by doing the behavior that you want. And I know, again, that's one that's, Pam, did you need to say something?
A quick question for you.
Yeah.
In that example,
yes.
When you give the item back to the child, hey, here's your Legos. How do you reinforce that? Do you reinforce that verbally?
Yes, you can
tie that together. Does that?
That's a good question. That's a good question. And so, yes, when you hand them the Legos, you might say, you got out the door on time. Here are your Legos. And let's say that, again, you take the Legos back. And then the next day, they do not get out the door on time. They mess up on day number 2. Your feedback to them in those moments is a prompt. So while they're not getting ready, you would be saying to them, don't forget, you only get Legos this afternoon if you get ready on time. So keep going. I know you can do it. And I know you want those Legos. So get on your shirt, get on your shoes. So you can see that you're in the beginning of doing a process like this, you're still spending a lot of time prompting your child. The goal, though, is once they learn that you mean this, you get to back off over time. Or for younger children, you'd be doing this anyways, because you've got to teach them all these things. But for older kids, you do truly get to back off once they learn that you truly mean what you said. And then what happens is, let's say they do really, really mess up and they do not get the Legos on day number 2. When they come home from school on day number 2, it's important not to continue to punish. There is no punishment associated with messing up the morning routine. The punishment, in air quotes, is they don't get the consequence they like. Instead, they get no Legos. That's the punishment. No Legos. That's the consequence. So when they come home and are like, where are my Legos? You're able to say, you decided not to get ready on time this morning, so you didn't earn your Legos, but you can do it again tomorrow. If you can get up in the morning, you can get your Legos tomorrow. Obviously, me talking about this, it's not going to be that magical the first time you do it, because that first time they mess up and you don't give them the Legos, you will have a fit or a tantrum or whatever it is that your child currently does, your child currently does, you're going to trigger it. And it's okay. The fact that you trigger that, it would have happened either way. You're just triggering it intentionally to teach them a very valuable lesson, which is they are in control of the consequences that happen to them. You set the consequences, they choose the behavior. So when they're mad at you for taking their Legos, you can very nicely say, I didn't take your Legos. You decided not to get ready this morning. At an age-appropriate sort of level. And so that is my 2-part answer to how do I get them to listen to me? How do I get them to do basic things without delay? That is the method to get to where you want to be, but I recognize it will be bumpy and time-consuming, and it might take you some time to get there. The only other thing that I would like to add to this part of the discussion is that really young children, like 2, 3, 4, it is developmentally appropriate sometimes for them just not to do what you want them to do. So sometimes it's just all going to sort of go wrong through no fault of yours or their own. It's because they don't have emotion regulation yet, which is, I think, a question I'll talk about here in a little bit. Somebody had asked about, what if my child has a hard time regulating their emotions like a toddler? Everything I've just said is still true. So it can make it harder to do because you have to repeat yourself so frequently, but that's not necessarily because you're doing anything wrong or they're doing anything wrong. They may just not be old enough yet to regulate their emotions. What I can say about that, though, is you can teach young children regulation skills. And this might make you laugh, but I do what I'm about to tell you with every person I treat. Even if you were 25 or 65, I would still talk to you about doing what I'm about to say you teach your toddlers to do. But if your child is having trouble regulating their emotions, particularly on that day 2 example, when you don't give them the Legos, I use bubbles. And because I'm a real proponent of making your discipline efforts fun, because kids want to do fun things. And if it's fun, they will do it with you, as long as they haven't like totally melted down. We'll talk about that in a minute. But bubbles, when you think about it, the long story short is a human body cannot be agitated and mad and calm at the same time. We're not capable of that. Our bodies can only be one way or the other. So if a child is agitated and mad, I hand them bubbles and I say, blow the absolute biggest bubble you can, because it makes them breathe in a calm style of breathing. So as adults, we talk about diaphragmatic breathing and all of these fancy terms, but basically what it means is you take in a whole ginormous breath and blow out as much of it as you can all at once. That is a calm, deep diaphragmatic breath exercise. And you can get most people to do that by handing them bubbles and asking them to blow the biggest bubble they can. And for really little kids, you can trick them into being calm because they think they're having fun and you're making their body calm down. And what we know just from like a research perspective is if you calm a body down, your thoughts and feelings will follow. It's called cognitive behavioral therapy. Some of you will have heard of that. But if you can calm a child's body down, the rest of them will get calm too. And then suddenly you're able to talk to them when you couldn't before because they were melted down. So I carry bubbles with me everywhere, and everybody I treat gets a bottle of bubbles when they come in my office. Sometimes I get looked at really strangely, but you're going to get bubbles if you see me. So in the same vein, again, all of these I think will apply to all ages of children, but I'm sort of focused a little on the smaller ones right now. But another thing that I think is quite important when we're just talking about like, how do I get them to listen when you're trying to do these two-part, things that I talked about. Another one that I always talk about is remembering to pepper praise into that. Because earlier when I showed you the slide of types of reinforcements, one of them is a social reinforcement, which is super powerful for young kids in particular, but all humans in general. But really little kids, whether they act like it or not, want your praise. Even when they're acting like they could care less if you are proud of them or not, or if you're happy with their behavior or not, I promise you they do. That is a normal developmental trait for young children. So as much as it might be covered by negative behavior, the desire for your caregiver praise is under there somewhere. So always praise. And in the case of behavioral like intervention, when you're trying to change behavior, praise effort if they don't give you the product you want. So like if you can praise product, like good job taking your plate to the dishwasher, great, do that. If you can't, praise what I call successive approximations. If they get up from the table without throwing a fit, be like, you got up, you're doing good, you're almost there, keep going. You praise effort. The more you praise the effort, the closer they get to the product that you want. So pepper as much of that in there as you feel capable of doing in the moment when you're in control of your own feelings and emotions and all of that sort of stuff. It's not always an easy job to do, but it is pretty powerful for most children. The last thing that I will say about this from a generic perspective is also you are in charge. Choose your battles. You're in charge, so you choose when you want to try to outlast their temper tantrum or whatever it might be. If you're not in the position to do so, you're in charge of not doing so. But it's not because their behavior led you to make that choice. You've already made it. Here's what I mean as an example. Let's say that you have 5 minutes to get into Walmart and out of Walmart, and you know that your child happens to throw a fit at the checkout every single time for a piece of candy. If you do not have the time to withstand their fit throwing at the checkout, go in with the intention of rewarding behavior with candy. And now that feels sort of crazy, but you're in charge in that instance. So if on the way into the store, you say to your child, we have 5 minutes to get in there and get out. If you can run with me and help me find the red pillow or whatever it is you're looking for, you get your choice of candy in the dollar aisle. You're in charge. Like you have told them what you need them to do, and then you have given them the consequence that earned the behavior you wanted, which was fast. You wanted fast behavior, and they earned it based on the consequence that you told them would occur next. You can obviously flip that, and you only want to flip that when you're ready and able to withstand. So if you wanted that consequence to be negative and you wanted to word it in a negative way, and I don't mean negative bad, I mean negative punish. You can, and you just have to be ready to outlast the tantrums until all of this stuff I've talked about has taken root. Because in the beginning, there'll be lots of fits and starts and stops and jumps, and things will go well and it won't go well. So you always have to be ready to outlast. So you don't do that on your 5-minute run. You do the other sort of thing. Hopefully that made sense as well. Feel free, obviously, to ask me a question if you have it, but I'm going to keep trying to get to some of your other questions as we go. We talked about bubbles from an emotion regulation perspective. You might be thinking, I haven't heard anything about my teenager yet. You'd be surprised at how many teenagers are more excited about the bubbles than little kids. So if you've ever seen a random teenager walking around with like a bubble ring, you know, they love those things. So that will work on your older kids too. One of the sets of questions that I received was sort of around, what do I do if the behavior the child seems to be engaged in is intentional? Like I am intentionally hurting my sibling or something like that. And one of the things I will say about that is earlier when I said all behavior has meaning and most of the time it's designed to meet a need, it's very unlikely that your toddler has a need to hurt people. That's very unlikely. What they probably need / want is your undivided attention. And one of the quickest ways to get it is to do something naughty. So when you are trying to deal with something like an intentional behavior that's very much against the rules, first and foremost, think about what happens, what you do when they behave in that way. Sometimes you can take care of behavior like that by modifying your own reaction. Not that you can't protect your other child, I don't mean that, but there can be an immediate consequence to that, and you've decided it and you've told them ahead of time, every time you hit your sibling and I are going to go sit on the couch together and you're not allowed to come with us. Like, you're killing two birds with one stone there. Now, I'm not saying that's the exact right answer. Sometimes you have to sort out what is the most appropriate consequence for your child to figure out what they really want, but something in the realm of do something different to see what calms that behavior down. So in a nutshell, you remember that the behavior has meaning and you find an immediate consequence that somehow tries to undo what they're going after. We call those, in like my world, a functional behavioral analysis. And if you really feel like that's where your child is at, there's lots of people at places like Family Service that if you aren't already working with us, we'd be able to sit down and do that with you. But it's really identifying what the behavior is going after and finding a new way to give it to the child that removes the unliked behavior. But that's probably the extent I can go into in a setting like this. But it gives you a little brief intro to it. And then if you really determine that's where your child is, we can help you with that. I think that also leads me directly into, there were quite a few questions around, what if my kid doesn't respond to like traditional discipline? What if they don't seem to care about punishment? My honest, like real quick answer to that is exactly what I've been talking about. All children care, even though they act like they don't, just like all humans do. So like, even though I may act like I don't care that I got a speeding ticket when I was speeding, I do care. Even if you don't see it, even if I tell no one about it, like there is caring associated with that. It's just sometimes, and some people really don't show that at all. And when you're thinking about your children who not only do they seem like they don't care, they like rub that not caring in your face, which is I think one of the examples I was given. That behavior, that rubbing it in your face behavior, is designed to meet a need. Like, what is your response to that? What is your reaction to that? Because that's probably what they're going for. And you can find other ways to pull back what they're going for and apply that somewhere else. And I talk a lot about attention because a lot of child behavior is designed to get parental or caregiver attention, good or bad. It's not always logical, and kids sometimes don't care if the attention is bad as long as they got it and it's undivided. That's even true in single child families. Sometimes that doesn't always make a ton of sense, but it's definitely true in families with more than one child, even with well-behaved children. Sometimes they just really want your undivided attention. So that's one thing that you can watch out for kids who don't seem to respond to the things that you're trying to do with them. Watch for that. Experiment with giving them undivided attention in different ways at different times and see if that sort of starts to decline, and then you'll know that was at least part of it. The other thing is, earlier when I was talking about the fact that you remove punishment and apply consequences, that is very powerful for kids who don't respond to traditional discipline techniques. So somebody gave me the example of like they just laugh and they continue to engage in more bad behavior while laughing about it. Those sorts of kids usually earn attention with that behavior because you have to. So What I like to do in situations like that is sit down and pick the top behaviors that you want to be different. So like what is the thing that you want them not to do? And you attach their preferred stuff, whether that be toys, whether that be time in their room without you because they're a teenager, whether that be they get to eat in their room and not at the dining table. I'm making stuff up. You can pick anything you want as long as it's important to your kid. But pick anything that they want and attach it to the behavior you want. This like non-response to traditional discipline will almost always start to be reduced. I won't say it will disappear completely, maybe over time, but you will start to see it go down because the behavior no longer earns what they're going for. And when they don't get what they want, they will move on to a new behavior. That is like a human behavior, not a kid behavior. We all do that. You can capitalize on it to teach your child what you want them to do. So, I mean, the basic example I typically talk about with this is the idea of like, if you skip work and your boss doesn't pay you, your boss isn't punishing you. You earned the consequence of no pay by choosing not to go to work. Even though you might be mad at your boss and like think they're a jerk, they're not punishing you. You did a certain thing and there were consequences that followed that. So that's kind of the world you want this type of child to live in. So for children who don't respond to traditional discipline, who maybe even misbehave more, if you can flip your world to be this sort of consequences occur based on the behavior you choose, you're fully in charge of all consequences, but they are in charge of which ones they get. So as much as they want to be mad at you, they can be, but I'm going to say they can't be because consequences only occur based on the behavioral choices they make. And that you just keep coming back to that and keep coming back to that as much as you need to. And then you add in this other stuff to make it so that you're not always angry with each other. So you add in some of the fun sorts of things. One of the things that usually comes up in this sort of conversation is that they keep escalating or they keep getting worse. And this is where I bring back in the concept of do not underestimate the power of ignoring. Ignoring is an extremely powerful tool and humans hate it. My dog also hates it. I don't know if you can hear him whining, but animals and humans hate being ignored. It is a natural sort of human feeling. And if you attach ignoring to the behaviors you don't like, they will escalate because it's a learned behavior that stops working. So they're going to want to test that and keep testing that. But if you outlast them, the behavior will shift because it no longer gets what they want. And ignoring can be a real tool in all situations. It may not feel like it with your teenagers, but you still need to experiment with it with your older kids and your teens, because as much as they act like they don't care about you or want your attention, they do still want it. So ignoring can be very powerful for older kids, and we sort of stop using that tool when kids hit like, early childhood. So pull it back out with your older kids and at least experiment with it. I see a question about how long is reasonable for ignoring to work, 2 weeks, 2 months. The average behavior change, like this is research-based, so it's not real life, but in research settings, the average behavior changes within 14 days of a new implementation. So what I mean by that is, like, how right now you could drive to work with your eyes closed? Probably not really, don't do that. But you just go, you just do your pattern. Like if something changes in the environment that no longer allows you to take the normal roads you take, the average person needs about 14 days for that to like click and for you to stop going the wrong way when you're not thinking. So like when we're not thinking, we can just drive. We just drive and we somehow magically get home. You need about 14 days of thinking, oh, don't turn left, before you stop accidentally turning left. I hope that example made sense. So if you can do solid ignoring of a negative behavior that is not dangerous for a couple of weeks, you should start to see change. When it's dangerous, I recognize it becomes an impossible tool. But it should be something you pull into your repertoire if you're not using it already, because it will be very powerful. The other thing I will say about ignoring is that it doesn't have to be wild and crazy. Like, you don't have to plan ignore, and you don't have to just like let them do bad things. It doesn't always have to look like that. When I'm talking about ignoring, one of the primary ways you can use this is your attention. So like if a child was poking you on the shoulder and going, mom, 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 what they're waiting for is for you to go, what? Because that's what you're going to do eventually when they've hit the magic number of moms. So if you can ignore long enough, eventually they're going to stop poking you and say, mom. The trick is for us to do it long enough. And I know that's a really silly example, but apply the same logic to whatever behavior you don't like, and it's safe for you to ignore it. Let's see. What else do I want to talk about? Somebody had asked a question about healthy to let your kids reap the consequences that are natural for their behaviors. Yeah, short answer is yes. Longer answer is as long as it's safe. But all the things we've been talking about are exactly that. You're sort of setting the consequences so they're not exactly natural, but you're setting them, and then they reap that consequence based on the behavioral choices they make. Taking away things being okay for discipline, short answer is yes. And if it works for your child, absolutely yes. That doesn't work for a lot of kids that bring you to a talk like this. So a lot of people have children who, for whatever reason, don't respond well to the removal, like the punishment aspect of discipline. That's why I've spent so much time talking about stop punishing and start consequencing, with this different view of consequencing, is because that works far better on those children who traditional punishment doesn't work very well for. And you're holding all the power in this scenario, because a lot of times when you're talking about discipline, with no matter the age of the child, you becomes a power struggle. If you set the consequences attached to the behaviors that you want and don't want, you're fully in control. It's their job now to do what they need to do to earn the consequence they want, which means you set the plan and you step back. That's where ignoring comes in as well, because you're not applying punishments. They're making choices. I know it's a little nitpicky, but it is a difference. Best form of discipline, personally, I think the one that we've been talking about, there's lots of different types of discipline, but this one I think works the best with the people that I talk to about discipline. Somebody had also asked a question about, if you allow your child to pick what they deem as an appropriate discipline, is that an effective way to handle punishment? I want to say, in general, no. But in the way that we've been talking about it, absolutely. Because if you know what consequences on the good side your child wants, they've told you what you need to attach to the behavior you don't want. Their most preferred consequence should be directly attached to your most annoying, biggest behavior you want to change. Link those things. And it's really important to remember it has to be a consequence they want. Sometimes people talk about things like, well, I took away their bike. And I was like, when was the last time your child rode their bike? It was like 2 years ago. That will never work, because if they don't want it, they will never engage in the behavior that gets that consequence. So like, you always want their most preferred consequence with your least favorite behavior. Those are the two things that should go together. The cool thing about this, and also in response a little bit to the question that was asked just a second ago, is that once a new behavior pattern has been established, it's the behavior that is expected now. You can attach that same consequence to something different. So if it's a solid like 2 or 3 weeks that your child is now successfully getting out the door for school on time, Legos get attached to something new. You don't have to leave Legos and getting out the door attached to one another forever. Once the behavior exists, that's the expected behavior. If they try to stop doing that behavior after you stick Legos elsewhere, they earn a negative consequence. So right away when that child, so like, let's say that you've attached Legos to something else, the first morning that the child is like dawdling and not getting ready quickly, you can say, do not forget that if you don't get out the door on time, you get no dessert. Whatever, I'm making that up. But you can attach at that point whatever consequences are your favorite, from a, you know, like, I know I keep using the word consequence, but you attach whatever negative consequence you like to that refusal to do a behavior that you know they're capable of. And then you just keep going down the line, keep going, keep going, keep going. Let's see. You talked about impulse control, like your child knows what they should do, but they don't control their impulses, and then they keep getting in trouble because the impulse control aspect gets in their way. This one's a little more effortful on your part, but in the moments that you are with them, watching them let their impulses get in their own way, you would need to consistently remind them, I need you to remember, if you don't get this test done, you don't get your Legos when you get home. Now, in that instance, I was being a teacher or something like that. But they may need really a whole lot of reminders, and that's actually okay. It is not necessarily a choice-based behavior that is just part of having impulse control issues or maybe like ADHD. Those children need lots of extra reminders, and it might be frustrating as a parent, and they've got no control over it. That is the way that their brain particularly works. What I will say to make you feel hopefully a little bit better about that is that when it comes to things like ADHD, that inattentiveness or that impulsivity, most humans to at least some degree will outgrow some of that stuff. So some of that stuff will just naturally get better as your child ages. But in the meantime, this stuff will still work with them. They just may need some additional reminders to really help that message stick. Oh, there were a couple of questions about what if we're in like two different households and one parent has always been the disciplined parent, but now you live separate, or you disagree about parenting styles. Those things are all fine. All of these principles will still be applicable. You just tell the child, I'm sorry, at that other house, there isn't these consequences, but in this house, here's what they are. So you can keep doing that if you want to, and here is what will happen when you do. And if you do that enough times, eventually the behavior will stop because they will not want the consequence. And I know it may not, just because I say that, you don't necessarily, you're like, oh, great, that's really what's going to happen. But what I can tell you is if you give these sorts of things a couple of months, my experience has been it always works. If we are as we adult, if us as like the parental figures or the adults are able to maintain pretty decent consistency with it, it will always work. Let's see, there were some questions about, oh, here's one other one I want to give you. There were lots of questions about, on our side, the parent side, maintaining our own sort of behavior and knowing when to battle, not to battle. I want to tell you the concept of what we call ABC baskets. And the short way to think about this is that oftentimes parents will put every behavior in an A basket. And the reality is, A baskets are keeping my child alive. A baskets are 1000% not negotiable. Like if you've run into traffic, I am grabbing you. It is a not negotiable thing. A baskets are very firm. C baskets are, why am I arguing about this? It's not a big deal. And B baskets are the ones you're gonna like work on. What happens for most adults and most parents, particularly when their child has been misbehaving for a little while, all behaviors inadvertently get stuck in the A basket. You put everything in the A basket and you argue about everything. And as the parent, it is okay for you to take items out of the A basket and put them in the C because you're in charge of that. So if you find yourself arguing all the time with your child about the fact that they're wearing a hoodie in the middle of summer, stop and check yourself and say, why am I arguing about this? I am putting that in the C basket and we are no longer worrying about that. If there was a reason it needed to be in the A basket, then it's not negotiable. You will be putting up with whatever negative behavior they give you in return because you refuse to let them do that thing. Those are allowed to be A basket items. B basket items fall into this category we've already been talking about. That is any behavior that you would like to shift or change. So the real addition to what I'm talking about here is feel free to put some stuff in the C basket. We as parents forget the C basket. And if you put some stuff in the C basket, it relieves some of the pressure on trying to do all of this. When your child is already struggling some with behavior, this will give you a little bit of peace. And can be quite helpful with the like maintaining your own composure and knowing when to argue and when not to argue, and when am I going to fight about this and when am I not going to fight about this. You decide ahead of time. Let's see. We talked about, there were some questions around power struggles, which I think I already addressed. We talked quite a bit about ignoring, and as silly as it sounds, go somewhere else. Like they certainly can't have your attention if you're in your room watching TV with your door locked. You probably can't do that with your 4-year-olds, but you certainly can with your 16, 17-year-old, 14, 15-year-old. Someone had asked specifically about how to apply discipline principles to a child who already has temper regulation or temper issues. Everything I've talked about is applicable to those children too, but for kids who have temper control issues, it is quite important to make sure that you're not trying to discipline while they're like escalated and angry. As hard as it might be to do, those children do not hear you when you're trying to talk to them if they're escalated. They really need to be calm for what you're saying to register and for them to hear it. So, and what I mean by calm is give it some time. You can hand them bubbles and make them blow them until they've calmed down. Or you can all just separate. Metaphorically, everybody goes to their corner and you calm down and then you come back. The discipline can still exist. The consequence can still exist. It does not have to be applied in that exact moment. The closer, the better. But for kids like this, I know it only escalates if you try to apply a consequence and they're already angry. So try to do any of the other things we've talked about, like ignoring or walking away, until they're calm enough for you to be able to come back. And part of you also may be asking, yes, but now they have escalated and they've cussed me out. What is the consequence for that? That can be a parallel process. So in that exact moment, you don't necessarily have to say, and now you're grounded for cussing me out. That can come later. Like you can be doing what you're doing and you can be calming down. And then later you can come back to your child and say, you're calm, we're watching a movie and we're going to have a good night. And I need you to know, you know that if you cuss me out, you don't get blank thing. And it's okay, we'll do something different instead, but you're not getting your preferred, you don't get your Legos when you behave like that. And if you have a child who is calm in the moment, they're more likely to hear that and accept it than if they're already angry. They're never going to hear it if they're angry. Doesn't mean they won't re-escalate. Sometimes this takes a lot of tries, but you will be more successful if they're calm. I think the same applies. Somebody had asked about like their 13-year-old who would like name call and blame and make the whole family feel quite uncomfortable in these sort of instances. The same concept I was just talking about applies to those older children. The addition that I would add here is go away. Like that child does not get your family's attention when they are behaving that way. Everyone gets to separate from them. They don't get y'all. Now, I know that might feel and sound a little bit harsh, but their behavior earns the consequence of no family members. If they would like to be with their family members, they will not behave in that manner. You have to establish that and then implement that. So in the moment, it's not going to work if you just randomly walk off. They will just follow you or pester you or whatever it might be. You establish that and you say, this is the new thing we're doing. When you behave that way, the rest of us are gone. So just FYI. The trick to that is obviously if the child escalates in a way that is unsafe, you have to like tweak that a little bit. And we don't have time to get into all of the nitty-gritty details for any of these examples. But again, lots of therapists at Family Service and other types of places would be able to go into like all the details around that. I know there were some additional questions. I think I've hit quite a few of them. I think the last one I want to mention is one person had asked about, what do I do if I don't know which sibling is telling the truth when they're fighting and things like that? Don't take sides. The simple answer to that is, if you don't know, you don't know. Don't guess and make them handle it themselves. Don't solve that for them, because if they don't earn you, there's no reason for them to fight, or they'll just handle their stuff on their own and you never have to be involved in it. So don't guess on who did right and who did wrong, and don't solve it for them. Yeah. Oh, and the last one that I thought was really funny is somebody had asked about, how do I get my child to care about their grades or education or school? It's like, if I could do that, I would also, that's $1 million question. That's a real hard one. My best answer to that kind of question is, if at all possible, do something that makes it fun. We like doing things that are fun to us. And if school is very hard for your child, there's no way that that is fun. So if you can do anything that makes it fun for them, make it fun, and follow it by good consequences. If they do their homework, they get good stuff with you. And you don't have to buy them things, but maybe as soon as homework is done, undivided attention from you with games or movies or whatever it might be that they really love. So I can't make them care about it, but you can make them be okay with doing it by this sort of application of good consequences. And also, not everybody loves school. It is also okay if your child really never likes school. Not everybody does. I know people become adults who would never pick up a book. And those people are fine. So some kids just aren't going to like school. They just have to do it because it's a rule. That's something they got to do. So, okay. I think I've hit a bazillion different sorts of questions. I know we've got just a couple minutes if anybody wants to say anything, as I am looking at my sheet here to make sure I at least hit on the majority of the questions. Oh, I do have one additional one. I don't know if anybody, one last thing that I do want to say is, people talked about, my buttons are being pushed. I am not being patient. I, as the parent, what do? How do I not lose my temper? The real answer to that question is, you're a human. You will lose your temper. You are going to yell. You are a human. You just happen to be parenting someone. The most important thing you can do in those situations is know your own limits, take breaks when you need them, and model that behavior for your child. Say, I am way too mad and I don't want to yell at you, so I'm going to go cook, you go play. And then we'll get together when it's dinner time. And if you don't do that and you do end up doing something you don't like, model apology. Come back when you're calm and model an appropriate apology for, I didn't mean to yell at you like that. I am quite sorry for it. Let's talk about it again. So I did want to hit on that one. And I did see somebody unmute, I think. So if that's a question, happy to answer it.
I did have a quick question for you.
Yes.
So I am signed up I have not had services for my child before, and I am bringing her in December. We have not seen a therapist. So being new to that process, what can I bring with me? I've been trying to write down key things or simple examples. Are those things that are going to be helpful? Should I provide anything ahead of time as far as my concerns, or just bring all of that to the initial meeting?
Yes, I think the short answer is that's perfect. You'll get you'll get a good hour or so right in the beginning with your first appointment, where they're going to take tons of details from you. And then as you go forward, more and more details will be shared. From a provide ahead of time perspective, Pam might want to speak to it, but there are registration materials online where you can do some of your paperwork ahead of time to save you that when you get to the building. But from a just what to bring perspective, your knowledge is all we need. Is just for you to be able to tell us the things that you're experiencing, and for you to be able to give us examples of that. That's really all we need, is to be able to talk with you.
Okay, thank you.
That's a great question. And all of the registration forms, all of the paperwork, it is available online. Unfortunately, we're not at the point where it's, type it in and hit submit yet.
Yes.
By God, we're working toward it. But at least it's out there. You can print it, print it out and complete it before you get here. It does save some time. But kudos to you for reaching out because we know how hard that is.
Yes.
We know how hard that is. And Abby, I'm going to tack on one thing.
Yes, please.
I will never forget when my son was 5 years old, I attended a parenting course, and parents, caregivers, guardians, you are going to not follow through on you're going to have this plan, and one day it's just not your day. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to follow through, and you're going to feel like, God darn, I failed. But don't give up, because it is hard. But that consistency, if you stick with it and give yourself some grace and say, God, I hate it when I'm human. I'm gonna get it. We're gonna keep working on this tomorrow. You'll get there. You'll get there.
Absolutely. Yep. And kids are extremely resilient. They will also get there. Awesome. I didn't see any other additional questions in the chat. I know it's 2 minutes after 7:30, so I won't keep anyone any longer, but I think you're always welcome to, go on our website and track down my email address. You're welcome to send me a brief email. I can try to give you a little more guidance if there's anything I talked about you just want to know a little bit more about. Happy to do that.
Well, thank you for all of the information you shared with us tonight. I think no matter the age of your kid, I hope you found some useful information and some techniques to go back and try. Reminder, if you need a certificate of attendance, please type your first and last name in the chat and we'll get that to you as soon as we can. If you know anyone who wanted to sit in tonight and wasn't able to, or if you want to reference anything that we discussed, it should be up on our website on Monday. You just go to fsgctopeka.com and click on the blue parent resources button. Next month's real world parenting topic is eating disorders. And be sure to like our Facebook page to check out the short weekly videos on the topic of the month. And on behalf of Family Service and Guidance Center, I thank you all for joining us tonight.